Good evening. My name is Laura Dobbin, and I'm pleased to serve as the Foundation's board chair. On behalf of our board of directors, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight for what is traditionally our gathering at Waveney House. We hope to get together with you in person again in the near future. In this past year, individuals, families, and organizations came together to support positive and lasting change
Tomorrow
in the community
is the rehearsal,
and to do more together than we could do alone. We partnered to invest more than $2 million in grants to nonprofit organizations. This included over $550,000 invested in local nonprofits, carefully vetted through our annual grant cycle. And critically, we continued the work of our COVID-19 response. Tonight, you'll hear from several guests about this work, which has now mobilized more than $750,000 in additional rapid grants for our local community. Even in times of social distance, we continue to be buoyed by more than 140 people who volunteered with us as grant reviewers on our virtual luncheon committee, as appeal committee co-chairs and members, and other activities. There is such a ripple effect to bringing together more friends and neighbors, and our town is special for its tradition of giving. We are so deeply grateful. You are our friends and our advocates. Our work simply would not be possible without you. You are a tremendous family of givers. Thank you. We recently kicked off our annual appeal grant cycle, where we vet local organizations seeking funding for a wide variety of work, everything from the arts to seniors to education to the environment and so much more. Over the next few months, nearly 100 people from across our community will mobilize to steward our grant process and vet the more than 80 organizations that seek our collective support. This work is not possible without you. Thank you for your generous support of the Community Foundation, and through us, the organizations providing much needed services and making our community a more vibrant place. Thank you to the fantastic group of people who served on our annual appeal committee, and especially our amazing appeal co-chairs, Jean Ganussi and Marley Thackeray. Our volunteers make a huge difference by reaching their friends and neighbors, sharing why it's so important to grow local giving. And thank you to all of you who gave to the annual appeal. We saw tremendous generosity at year end, and support is still coming in and will help us respond further to key issues in our community. We are so deeply grateful, and we are ready to put your dollars to good work. I must also thank my fellow board members. Our terrific board, 20 members strong, lead the foundation's work. We are so pleased to have 5 great board members join us this past year: Monica Chimera, Jim Clayton, Dan Harris, Erica Schweidel, and John Sheffield. We also want to recognize 6 individuals who completed their board service this year: Kathleen Abbott, Rob Fryer, Kelly Hanratty, Kay Linneman, Sheila Petty, and Heather Ziegler. Thank you all for your service to our community. I also thank deeply the incredible dedication and work of our foundation CEO, Lauren Patterson, and the entire office staff. To provide us with an overview of the foundation's finances, I'd like to introduce Jeff Williams, board vice chair and our treasurer. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you very much. Last June, due to the growth in the number of charitable funds we manage and the strong performance in the financial markets, the foundation enthusiastically closed out its 2021 fiscal year with nearly $28 million in assets under management, up from nearly $22 million at the end of the 2020 fiscal year. At the end of the 2021 calendar year, even in the face of increasingly volatile markets, we are looking after over $29 million, lodged in 89 charitable funds, representing 44 donor-advised funds, 10 board-directed funds, 13 field of interest funds, Those are funds where we are the vehicle for a local charitable project. 7 specific scholarship funds and 15 agency funds where not-for-profit organizations have chosen to invest their endowments with us. As Laura mentioned, during the 2021 fiscal year, your generous contributions to our annual appeal, the COVID Response Fund, and donations directed by our donor-advised funds enabled us to support more than 85 local and area nonprofits and important institutions who have been critical to helping those who were most severely impacted by our ongoing health emergency. As you may remember hearing from Rob Fryer, my predecessor as Treasurer and Finance Committee Chair, most of our funds are managed by 2 professional managers, Vanguard and the Investment Fund for Foundations, also known as TIF. The Foundation's Finance Committee is comprised of board members and local citizens who have expertise in the finance and investments worlds and oversee the performance of these managers. I thank them for their dedicated service. As you might expect, we take care to ensure that our portfolio of investments is widely diversified among equity and fixed income mutual funds. We enjoy a modest exposure to alternative investments through the work done by TIF. We have recently begun exploring the realm of socially responsible investing, or environmental, social, and governance investing, strategies which arose when 2 donor-advised funds asked if we could provide exposure to investment vehicles that abided by ESG standards. This is a fast-growing sector of the investment management world, and due to increasing interest, we are considering expanding our ESG offerings. The focus of our investment strategy is to preserve the real purchasing power of our assets while achieving positive returns over the long term, thus enabling the funding of NCCF's work within the community. As we do in the autumn of each year, we held meetings with our investment managers, and representatives of our donor-advised funds and agency funds were invited to attend these meetings along with board members and committee members. Those were very successful meetings. Again, as I close, I want to thank you for your generous ongoing support of the foundation. And now it's my extreme pleasure to introduce Lauren Patterson, President and CEO of the Canaan Community Foundation.
Thanks, Jeff, and good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see you all here tonight, albeit virtually again this year. I promise we will be back in person sometime soon. I don't have to tell you all that this was another unusual year, coming up on 2 years of just such environment. But we're here tonight to celebrate what's been really, I think, a showing of the great generosity and the way that our community at large has rallied around one another in these really unusual circumstances. So on March 18th of 2020, nearly 2 years ago, and just a few days after the stay-at-home orders, we launched our COVID-19 Response Fund. And I am so pleased to say that since that time, we have reinvested over $750,000 into our community nonprofit partners to respond to the most critical and unique needs that were presented by the pandemic. That is only as a result of all of your generous giving from families, from businesses, many who gave several times over to ensure that as needs changed over time, that their neighbors were able to sustain and survive in this pandemic and the long tail of impact that we're seeing for quite some time. We just made our 6th round of grants from that response fund. That is intended to be our last round of grants from the fund, but I will never say never with this pandemic. And so we are not saying that we're closing the fund. It remains as a vehicle if we need to use it for something related to this pandemic sometime in the near future. But otherwise, what we're seeing is that many, many nonprofits across our community are continuing to adapt to the results and the impact of the pandemic. So we're going to see that for a long time. You can see a full list of all of the grants that we've made through the Response Fund on our website. And you can also see a little bit more detail in our annual report that we released in December. We'll drop links to both of those on our website into the chat box in case you want to check them out. But tonight we're going to talk with 2 guests from leading local nonprofit organizations. They have both been partners of ours on an annual basis for many years, but they were also recipients of grants in this last round of Response Fund dollars. So we wanted to talk with them tonight about some things that they're seeing and things that you all can think about going forward in our work collectively as a community. We will open this up to Q&A. So you can use the chat box to drop in questions as you think of them. We'll talk with both of our speakers in conversation for a few minutes, and then after we speak with both, then we'll open it up to any questions from the audience. So first we'll kick it off with Michelle Condarino. Michelle is the Executive Director of Open Doors. They've been a partner of the Community Foundations for nearly 20 years. And through our response fund, we've made 2 different grants to them over time to support specifically their food program, but they're doing many, many things in the South Norwalk community. So please join me in welcoming Michelle.
Hi, everyone.
There we go. Michelle, I wonder if you could just start briefly with an overview of Open Doors
Sure.
work, and it's really changed a lot in the last few years.
Yes.
So maybe you could highlight that specifically.
Sure. So thank you, and thank you for having me tonight and allowing us to share our story. I think most people who are aware of Open Doors think of us as a homeless shelter, which we are. So we have the only homeless shelter in Norwalk. We serve individuals and families. We serve meals both to those in shelter and to those in the community. We do 2 meals a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And we actually launched a couple of programs during COVID. One of them is also our street outreach team. So in June, actually, of 2020, we launched right at the beginning. And we actually had 1 part-time. Now we have 1 full-time and 1 part-time outreach worker. They go out and try to find people who are living outside, either get them into shelter or get them into housing. The second part of our organization is housing and housing stability. So we actually recognized many years ago that one of the biggest barriers to people exiting homelessness was the lack of affordable housing. And we developed, now we have 55 units of affordable housing that we own and operate. Those are all permanent housing units. And we do both short-term and long-term case management with people on property and also those who live in the community. In more recent years, we have really shifted some focus on our energies towards homeless prevention. And we had our community closet and our food pantry already in existence. But 2 other projects launched during COVID. So the first was our partnership with Norwalk Community Health Center that opened their clinic in October of 2020. And they provide medical, behavioral health, women's health services. They did a tremendous amount of testing in the first initial year of COVID. And the second program that we launched is our Financial Opportunity Center. That is a program open to everyone in the community, in the greater community. So people from New Canaan can certainly participate as well. First, it helps people assess, do they qualify for any benefits to help stabilize them in their housing. The second piece is employment placement. So we do some light coaching and place them into employment opportunities. And the third is long-term coaching. So we're really, sort of a very full service organization, providing a lot of resources to the greater Norwalk area.
Great. Can you say a little more about the launching of the programs? Were these things that you had queued up, or were they things that were developing needs as a result of the pandemic and it was an opportune time? What did that look like?
So a little bit of both. The health clinic was a projected project. We had actually hoped they would move in much earlier than they did, but staffing shortages caused them a delay in moving in. Street outreach, just my own history. So I've been with Open Doors for almost 3 years. This June will be 3 years. Previous to that, I was at Catholic Charities of Fairfield County. I started my journey in homeless services as a street outreach worker. And I've always overseen outreach. I love outreach. And I thought that we would be a really good partner for that. So when that opportunity came up, we really drove to it. The Financial Opportunity Center was very much a response to what was happening in this community, and recognizing that people who had never had to access benefits before, had never had unemployment, issues, had never, their finances had been stable, were suddenly going to need a lot of support and a lot of help. And we quickly kind of built out the FOC to be able to meet that need. Within the first really 8 months, we launched in March of 2021. We've seen 338 people in that program, and really connecting people to the rent relief, the utility relief programs. We've placed 87 people into employment opportunities. And we've really helped people, guide about 92 people through financial coaching and helping them assess what does their budget look like now, and how can they, decrease debt, increase savings, increase credit scores, so that they're able to sustain in this community.
That's fantastic. How much of that client work do you feel like through the Financial Opportunity Center is helping people manage the money that they have, or maybe access assistance, versus finding employment or getting into better paying jobs?
So in the initial year, we saw less people, out of 338, we saw 92 in the financial coaching section. But we're putting a lot of emphasis on that this year. We actually just launched a savings match program in which we will match what someone saves over 6 months up to $400. So it's really about building crisis money for people who do not have crisis money. Along with that is very intensive financial coaching for those 6 months. So we're starting to really build out a lot in that. What we're finding is that a lot of people, particularly with inflation, right? So if gas is costing you, $10 extra, and your groceries are now costing you $20 extra a week, and your utilities went up, suddenly you're making maybe the same amount, maybe even you're making a little bit more, you don't have as much money. And so working with them on how, okay, maybe it's let's call your insurance company and see or shop around insurance. Let's see if we can get you a cheaper rate. Let's see if the cable company, your internet providers, trying to find ways that people can naturally save money. But then also thinking about what are the other ways that you can engage. Again, it may be finding a new employment opportunity that pays at a higher rate. Or like I said, the savings match program in which we'll match you, just trying to find ways that people can bring income in and help decrease their debt so that they can stay in this community. Because I think what we've seen in Fairfield County is much higher than what the state's reporting as far as cost of living increases. And it's becoming very challenging, not only for, only 20% of the people we see in the Financial Opportunity Center are experiencing homelessness. So 80% of them are living in our surrounding communities, and they're really struggling with this rising inflation and cost of living.
I'm glad you said that point about where these folks are coming from, because you've really moved from bricks and mortar, kind of focusing intensely just on those clients you're serving within your 4 walls, to a more kind of community-based organization. Is that fair? So how much of your services, and we've supported your food programs as well through the Response Fund. So how much of that, what was the reach of that in the community as well?
So I have to say, I'm incredibly proud of my team, because these last 2 years, had we just done what we had always done, it would have been a triumph, right? Because, operating shelter, operating food programs, they're incredibly critical to the entire community's health and safety. But they have to be done on site. They have to be done face to face. The majority of us at Open Doors have worked through this entire pandemic on site, delivering services. But I think as an organization and as a team, we really recognized that there were much like greater needs happening, and that if we ever want to end homelessness, we cannot do it from the shelter door. We have to start pushing upstream and saying, let's get to a place where people aren't even thinking that homelessness is going to have to be an option for them. Let's try to stabilize people as much as we possibly can in their homes, help them start to see that economic mobility, so that they're able to keep up with rising housing costs. Maybe they're potentially looking at home ownership where they've never thought that that was possible to them before, but now they'll have the tools and the resources to be able to do things like that.
And when folks do get to the crisis point, though, and they need services within the shelter, can you talk a little bit about what that looks like now? Your whole sector had to turn on a dime.
Yes.
With a lot of mandates, right? So tell folks a little bit about what that looked like, and then what your environment is now.
Yeah. I mean, shelter and food services were two of the most unbelievably impacted areas of our service. And I think of really service delivery for nonprofits, where a lot of people were working with people remotely and trying to engage. You can't do that when you operate shelter, but people also live incredibly congregate. And so, creating social distancing meant we had to decompress. That's like our new word for the last 2 years, decompress our shelter. So for instance, our male dorm, we went from having 42 beds to 15. Because we needed to create these pockets where people could be safely housed together. And so we were able to, through a partnership with the state, access hotel beds. And we have done that on and off over the last 2 years. We're currently operating in a hotel right now, in addition to our beds here at Fort Merritt. And then our food program went from, in-house meals to delivering meals at the door. And when I think back to March of 2020, I mean, all of these things just happened in an instant. They were, we think about them now with distance in it, but in that moment, I mean, volunteers left overnight. We had to shut down volunteers. And so how do we serve meals when we've always relied on volunteer support? When we always had people inside, how do we now feed people from the door? How do we do so safely and for them and for the staff here? And so it was a tremendous amount of reconfiguring and out of the box thinking and creative problem solving to be able to continue to do the work, because the work is so critical. And the need was so significant, particularly around food in those first 3 months of the pandemic, that we have to do it, right? We don't have a choice. So how are we going to do this? And how are we going to, change the way we do things? And that's why the COVID Response Fund was so impactful for us, because, when you suddenly have to have takeout containers for 100 people, or I think it was 150, almost 200 meals twice a day, 7 days a week. That was a huge cost, right? That kind of just sort of sprung immediately at a time when we didn't know what our financial standing was going to be and how we were going to, meet all of these needs. We were staffing 2 locations 24/7, the hotel and the shelter here. We had this extra cost, cleaning supplies and PPE and all of these things. And that's what, those funds that were raised, I mean, we just can't say thank you enough, because, we just didn't know. We didn't know how long is this going to go? How, what's right today? Because they were changing rules constantly and updating protocols. And I got every day was 30 emails of did you see this study? Did you see this? And I was like, where is this coming from? I'm only looking at sources that I really want to trust. And, but, we were really just trying to adapt and be logical and keep people safe. And those funds were so critical to be able to target areas that we knew were going to be expenses that we weren't going to be able to absorb ourselves.
Sure. No, and thank you for guiding so much of the community through this response and being forward thinking in a lot of these approaches too. It's fantastic that you were able to launch so much in a rough period of time, but that was consistent too with your growing mission.
And I think, I've said this so many times, when it all first started, I was like, this is not the crisis, right? Like, this is a crisis. This is a health and safety crisis. But for the people we serve in this community at large, I always knew that the wave was coming. And so I was really trying to look down the road. How can I stop people from cascading into homelessness? And that's really where the Financial Opportunity Center came about, because it was like, okay, this is a national model. These three components, they make sense, right? Like, these are the three things people are going to need to be able to sustain through this.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, let's end our part of the conversation on this note. We'll turn over to our second speaker, but don't, if anyone's just joined us recently, please keep dropping questions in the Q&A box and we'll have a discussion with both our speakers at the conclusion. So next, I'd like to introduce Gail Melanson, who is the head of Mid-Fairfield Child Guidance Center. Mid-Fairfield has been a grantee of the Community Foundations for nearly 15 years, largely for their outpatient children's clinic. But we recently made a response fund grant that's supporting the hiring of a bilingual intake clinician, which we're very excited about. And I'm sure Gail will touch on this, but the stress of the pandemic has really affected largely most people, I would say, but has had a profound impact on particularly low-income families or those who face other barriers to service, which may include language and cultural barriers. So please join me in welcoming Gail. And Gail, I wonder if you can also start off by sharing a little bit kind of more broadly about Mid-Fairfield as an organization, because you do a lot.
Sure. Well, thank you. I want to thank you, Lauren, for having me and everyone else for having me. And I want to express my appreciation to the foundation for the continued support, and as well as the specific funds that were very crucial during the COVID time. So just a little bit about Mid-Fairfield. I'm the executive director. I've actually been at Mid-Fairfield for over 25 years. I've worked in every program and seen its growth, its ups and downs. We've been around since 1956, which I've not been there since, but so we are, for those of you that don't know what we do, we are a mental health clinic, and we actually focus on mental health and wellness services now, because we're also offering some additional services in terms of enrichment of music and arts and baseball and soccer clinics and things like that to look at the whole individual. We have our Norwalk-based outpatient clinic. We also offer in-home services in schools, in the community, and as we've heard people touch on, we do offer telehealth services as well through the pandemic, and it's something that we will continue to provide when it's appropriate. We coordinate our services with the school systems, with other community support programs. And the goal is really to reduce risk factors in the family system and build healthy and supportive family connections. So our work, we do individual work, but we look at the whole family. We strive to meet the unmet needs of our most vulnerable populations. So we serve families regardless of the ability to pay, or if they don't have insurance, or if they're underinsured. What we're finding a larger group of people is people who have insurance, but because their copays and deductibles are so high that a lot of times they're out of pocket costs are difficult for them to absorb. So we accept all of these families regardless of their insurance coverage. As one of the leading trauma experts in the community, we have a strong record of providing evidence-based interventions. So I won't get into all the alphabet soup, but we have a program called Dialectical Behavioral Therapy, known as DBT, for our more intense need adolescents who often struggle with cutting and suicidal thoughts and behaviors and things like that. And we also have a lot of evidence-based trauma groups that we offer, and individual trauma treatments that have been proven to be very successful. We offer our programs and services across the lifespan, all the way from prenatal mothers through adulthood. And we work, as I mentioned, with the families as well as the individual. And we also have a continuum of services. So we have psychiatric services, we have our outpatient children's and adult mental health services, as I mentioned, in-home, in-school supports. We also offer care coordination for basic needs that, you know, we were just talking about with Michelle. We help to coordinate those services as well. We have our more intensive services, our extended day treatment program, and an intensive outpatient for individuals that require, you know, 3 to 5 days a week of more intensive therapy. And then we offer consultation services. Our programs, we have 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week coverage. We have on-call clinicians who can respond to individuals' needs at any time. And we, as Lauren had mentioned, that one of our largest growing programs is our bilingual services. So we have the largest capacity for bilingual mental health services in the area. We offer Spanish and Creole. We have currently, I just did a count recently, we currently have 25 bilingual staff out of our 65 employees. So in every program, we have bilingual capacity within our billing team, our front desk. So, you know, for all of our services, we do offer that bilingual capacity. And if there is a language that is needed other than Spanish and Creole, we also use Language Link to accommodate all families, regardless of the language. Is that enough of an intro?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm glad you've been there for 25 years, Gail, because you can recite all the programs now. But so I wonder, can you talk a little bit more about the intake clinician, why that is so important to help with sort of a log jam?
Sure, absolutely. So almost 50% of our clients are of the Latinx population. And so this need has been growing and growing. And in the past, I mean, when I first started, we literally had one bilingual clinician, and we had to develop a wait list if, you know, they were waiting. So we've continued to hire. And what we found is the intake process, a lot of times families will have to wait if they don't have an immediate crisis so we could accommodate the intakes. And then our regular treating clinicians were doing these intakes, which also takes away from their caseload that they can hold. So for months, with the help of this funding, we were able to advertise, and we finally were able to fill the position of a bilingual intake clinician who could focus strictly on doing the bilingual intakes. We do have an English-speaking intake clinician, but we never had a bilingual Spanish-speaking intake clinician who could get these families in very quickly, and then we could assign them to the treating clinicians and get them the services more quickly.
That's great. And I'd imagine there's a tremendous amount of triage going on at the intake level. Can you talk a little bit about what have been the changing needs or services that have, you know, were there initial spikes for particular services? Are you seeing a slow grow in certain areas? Like what does that look like?
So we're seeing a lot of trauma. Obviously, with the pandemic, we're seeing trauma, but even prior to the pandemic, kids are just exposed to so much more, and we know so much more about the exposure of trauma on the developing brain, on the developing individual, and left untreated, there's a long-term effects of this trauma. So the sooner you can get individuals this trauma treatment, which is why most of our staff are trained in these very specific trauma treatments. We offer group trauma treatments in the schools. As a preventive measure, we go in and we screen whole classrooms to determine levels of trauma, and then provide a trauma group to those students. And many times, individual, staff personnel are surprised by the students that are screening positive for this this history of trauma, that it's oftentimes the kids who are flying under the radar, who might be quiet and not necessarily acting out, that they determine there might be domestic violence occurring in the home, a history of abuse. Many of the individuals who are coming from other countries have experienced trauma in their country of origin in the process of getting into the country. So trauma is a big thing that we've been seeing. And then with the pandemic, just the levels of stress and anxiety that is compounded, and families just, the good news is that it's really been able to shine a light on mental health and the mental health needs, and making sure we're all paying attention to the mental health needs. Norwalk Public Schools in particular have really been looking to expand the services offered. And I know a lot of the other schools and communities are doing that as well, setting aside funding to specifically focus on the mental health needs of the clients. And for us, the families as well, the parents were, at certain points, they were the teachers and the parent, and they were trying to work, and just the stress and anxiety of the families. We offer parent groups, so parents have an opportunity to talk about how they can help their children, but also how they can help themselves and how they can, relieve some of their stress and anxiety.
I would completely agree that a silver lining is that we're all thinking more about mental health, for sure.
Right.
Has telehealth been a silver lining as well, or is that something you're trying to manage and do more in person when possible? What's that balance?
So it's definitely a balance. There was a time, obviously, right at when the pandemic hit, we weren't doing any telehealth, and we all learned very quickly how to do it, as most people did in whatever work they're doing. Obviously, when you're working, especially with children and younger children, telehealth can be really challenging to get a kid to sit in front of the screen. We have it as a resource when we can, when we are able to. We would prefer to do in person, but it has allowed us. There was many times we were only working with, say, one parent in a family session because the other parent had to work. But now we can telehealth. We could have it be in person with the family members that could be there, and we can, have another parent join via telehealth, so the family can be together if they're not able to all be in the office together. And certainly, if someone isn't feeling well, they don't have to miss their appointment. We could still do telehealth if they're able to, if they're quarantined and all of those things. So yeah, it's definitely been a silver lining, and it's a balancing act because you don't want to necessarily just go to all telehealth, especially with children. And our more intensive programs really need the in-person.
Mm-hmm. I'm cheating a little bit, and I'm looking at our chat box, and someone asked about referrals to your organization. I'm curious too if these have changed over time, particularly during the pandemic, as maybe more partner organizations or schools or counselors are looking for mental health services.
So with most of our services, anyone from the community could make a referral. So if it's a partner agency, they might call to give us a heads up that someone is in need of services. For a lot of our services, we need to connect specifically with the caregiver to start the process, but we definitely accept referrals from community providers. Families can call themselves for a referral. Department of Children and Family sometimes will make a referral to us. So our referrals come from everywhere.
I'm going to invite Michelle back into our fold, and then we can start turning to audience questions. So a couple of questions, and we'll bounce around a little bit. For Michelle, we'll start with you. Can you talk a little bit about what long-term coaching is, what that looks like?
So, I think we all have financial goals that are short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And, where a lot of our work is like crisis and moving people forward, with the homeless shelter, it's like, you should be with us the shortest amount of time possible so we can get you into the most permanent place, housing placement. And long-term, the Financial Opportunity Center is more about, let's assist you like over the long-term period. And so, the initial goals may be to decrease that debt, and it may be to increase your savings to get you to place where you have crisis money. It's like, okay, great. So you did that. So now it's the next goal, right? Maybe it's purchasing a car. Maybe it's thinking about investment and retirement. Maybe it's thinking about home ownership. So it's really about guiding people, not just through crisis moments, but continuing to watch them and guiding them through like true upward mobility when it comes to, their financial health.
Great. And in terms of the age range that you serve, I mean, do you end up serving whole families with children? Are there services for children specifically? What does the breakdown look like?
So the majority of our services are for adults and families. And so I saw in the chat, there was a question about, do we have programs for homeless children? We do, because we have our homeless shelter. One of the challenges during COVID was our after school program. And, how many children should, we actually had it closed for a period, opened back up in the fall of 2020. And then, we do so after school. So actually we went from 2 days a week to 4 days a week, recognizing like people needed to get out. We actually had just renovated our family dorm. We finished in February of 2020. It was an absolute gift that we did it at that time period, because we were able to keep people safe and isolated. But they were never meant for people to be in 24/7. Certainly not full families,
Right.
With kids doing, learning in different capacities. So we were actually able to use some of our space to have kids be able to do school in a more school environment. So they weren't all like in their one apartment trying to, to do it at the same time. The challenge obviously is, keeping like safety and social distancing. And so we put up like little, dividers, and all the kids, we have kids masks, and we do temperature checks, and we're cycling kids through, because as we move families out, a new family comes in, and we kind of, have to reassess and work. So it's a really great program. But that's, I think our biggest program that we do, serving children.
I'm just going to add a follow-up question that just came in, which is about the approximate length of stay for clients and how that's changed during COVID.
Unfortunately, went up during COVID. And actually, one of the reasons it went up wasn't actually, well, a couple things. In the initial period of COVID, we actually were able to place people into housing very quickly, because we had money and we had resources and people, and we were able to say, like, I have somebody for you. You don't even have to show this apartment, right? Because landlords didn't want people coming in and out of the apartment for viewings. Like, we have somebody, we'll write you a check today, and they're in. That kind of died out pretty quick. And we've struggled with capacity, affordable housing capacity here. So those are part of the reasons. Also, some of our other providers are working from home, and their process slowed down. So ours slowed down a bit. We were at about 100 days. We peaked, I would say, at about 140 days length of stay, and have dropped back down. I think we're about 110 right now. And we're continuing to push that down. What is, I think, more exciting to us, we used to really hone in on length of stay, which we still do, but it's really about discharge, right? And so currently we are at 70% of the people who leave shelter are discharged to permanent housing. And that's really amazing. The state average is 40%. So our length of stay is a little bit longer, but our outcomes are much better.
Mm-hmm. Gail, can you reference too, I mean, how long are clients typically working with you, which I could see as either, it could be great to turn someone around quickly and triage something and get them out the door, but it actually may be great to work with them for a long time. So what does that look like for you?
So it really varies depending on, the individual family and certain programs. So some programs, so for example, our extended day treatment program, that is typically a 6-month program where kids are enrolled for 6 months. So toward the end of 6 months, we look to transition them into what we call lower level of care. So they were coming 5 days a week to us, 3 hours a day. So as they near the end of their 6 months, we're hoping to transition them to, maybe 2 days a week in our outpatient clinic. And I see someone was asking about the scope of our services. I don't think I mentioned it. So we serve about 1,000 individuals in all of our programs each year.
Great. So I'm sure there's a lot of variety in.
Yes. So with the length of stay, yes. So some people may come for 3 months in our outpatient program. Some may just participate in a 6-week group. I would say the average length of stay is about 9 months. If we look across all of our programs, the average length of stay is about 9 months.
Great. So my kind of question looking forward a bit is, what is top of mind for each of you? Is it there's a concern that there's going to be some new or different challenge coming up for the people that you serve in our communities? Is it something that sustains? What's that top, 1 or 2 things that you're thinking about?
Do you want to go first?
Sure, I could go first. So I think the need continues to grow. And as we mentioned earlier, the silver lining is people are paying attention to mental health needs, but we're also finding that kids are coming in with higher needs. So whereas before we had our teenagers who had suicidal thoughts and behaviors, we're seeing 10-year-olds come in with these issues. And we're seeing a lot of kids who need more intensive services. So it's just keeping up with the demand. It just feels like I keep hiring, and I don't know if, the workforce and hiring is such a challenge right now. So, and we're competing, agencies like us are competing with private practitioners who go into private practice, but they aren't taking any insurance, and they can just do it via telehealth. So to get staff that, are willing to work at a nonprofit, and obviously we can't compete with some of the salaries that some of the state and other agencies provide. So that's, to me, the biggest concern is how are we going to keep up with the need, and are we going to have staff that we can continue to recruit and who believe in, most people who are doing it aren't doing it to get rich, they're doing it because they believe in the mission and the work. So
Sure. Michelle.
Yeah, I mean, certainly echo a lot of that. Staffing has, been challenging throughout. I mean, I think our biggest concern is, as we look at a lot of the state and federal resources coming to a close, the rent relief program, utility relief program, they're out of money, and they still have thousands of applicants that are kind of left in limbo. Our eviction rates have not been high. We were in the moratorium, and since we've come out of the moratorium because of these programs, but with them gone, I think that's a big concern. Rising inflation costs are a huge concern. And, what that does to low-income families, and the added stress, that adds financially to them. And so, as we look at, you can think like, we've made it through. And I learned this lesson in 2008, it's like, we thought we made it through, but what ends up happening is people have resources, have family, friends, and then it's not for like a year, 2 years later, they burn through all of those resources. And that's when it hits systems. And at that point, it's no longer shiny and new. Most people's lives have returned to a sense of normal. And yet it's like significantly impacting people who are lower income. And so we're trying to get ahead of that as much as we can to get people the resources they need so that they're not falling off that cliff, 6 months, a year from now.
Yep. No, that's a great point.
Yeah. And with us, we have a charity care program for those that don't have insurance. And we've seen that number just grow and grow of people who just, we had a percentage of people who used to apply for it. And now it's almost every family coming in.
Well, I
think what we're seeing too is a lot of people who lost employment, who regained employment at a much lower rate. And so that's, I think, been a big challenge. It's, you know, we can say like, well, our unemployment numbers are going down. They may be going down, but are people still making the same amount of money they were making before? And what we're seeing is that no, that's not the case. And so, you know, programs like, you know, yours, like, yes, it's like suddenly it's like, I need that care, but I can no longer afford to do it because I don't have the same insurance, or I don't have any
Right.
insurance now, or
And even if they have
copay.
insurance, yeah, they have
Yes.
insurance, but they have to meet a $10,000 deductible before
Yes.
anything covers it.
Yeah.
So
You know, don't we always say that to ourselves, right? Like, we'll prioritize everything else except for our own like mental health. And, you know, as I've said that to myself many times this year, like, you have to prioritize your own mental health. And, you know, because it's an expense. Even if you have a copay, I mean, I think our copay here is $75 for a specialist. That's a lot of money for somebody to pay, you know, if they have to see somebody regularly.
Yeah.
absolutely.
So this will be probably a closing note. You know, everyone who's on the line here cares about local work and the work, you know, probably tuned in to hear you both speak. What are things they should be thinking about? You know, giving, obviously, but we talked a bit about giving flexibly. Are there things going on in your communities or specifically with your organizations where there are opportunities to help, or should we just be keeping an eye on certain issues, concerns that you flagged tonight? Any closing thoughts on those?
You know, I would say a couple of things. One is that, you know, we haven't really talked much about equity tonight. But I think it's really important to recognize that a lot of our services, I can speak for mine, you know, I'm going to guess, Gail, maybe yours as well. You know, these are equity programs, right? We don't call them that, but we are serving, you know, significant portions of people in the BIPOC, you know, community, and it's completely disproportionate to our community's population, right? So we know, I think in Norwalk, in like the Data Haven 2019 equity study, if the average income of white family was 107,000, it was 57,000 if a person was Black, or I'm sorry, 54, 57 if they were Hispanic. So there's like huge disparities in what people are making income wise. And then that obviously affects their housing stability and a lot of other things. So, you know, these programs are really, you know, focused on serving people and giving opportunity to people of all races and ethnicities. And as far as, you know, we're really starting to look at how do we use people with, you know, different skill sets within our programming. So we're actually going to be bringing volunteers into the Financial Opportunity Center to help run groups and mock interviews and things like that. So, you know, people who have like HR skills, financial skills, you know, you don't have to work in it if you're really good at budgeting, right? You know, we're going to start pulling some of people in to help support as this program. I mean, we were only contracted to serve 190 people, and we served 338 the first year. You know, we cannot do this with staff alone, and, you know, and meet the needs of this community. So we're really looking at ways that we can use volunteers, not just to be serving meals and helping in our community closet, because that was it, right? Like serve meals, community closet, or you're on the board of directors, right? There's like no middle ground. So trying to figure out how can we use volunteers, you know, to help support the mission and expand its reach and serve more people.
Great. Gail?
And I would just add, you know, Michelle mentioned the contracts. So we've had state contracts that have remained flat for, you know, 10, 15 years. And obviously you cannot continue to provide the services. And as Michelle said, whatever our contract says, I'm sure we provide double of what we're supposed to be providing because we just keep continuing to meet the demand. So without the generous support of foundations such as this one, we'd be out of business, quite honestly, because the state contracts don't cover it. So as much advocacy that could be done, that's definitely needed. And, you know, this year we were promised the world that all of the nonprofits were going to get this huge increase, and when it came down to it, we all got a 4% increase. So it's,
Which hasn't
you know,
materialized, by the way.
right.
I know the ongoing challenges there.
Yeah. So
Those are all really great, I think, constructive points for us to think about. Some, you know, maybe more tangible ways to volunteer and get involved, and some, you know, bigger, longer term things for us to wrestle with, but all really important to keep in mind. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you, Gail and Michelle, especially for sharing so much of your knowledge with us and for all you've done for our communities during these past 2 years, but going on, you know, far beyond that. And I know going forward as well. Thank you for all of our friends, our partners, our supporters who are on the line tonight, or who are maybe watching this recording after the fact. We could not accomplish any of this work with our partners without you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Again, I really hope we will see each other in person sometime soon. We are, fingers crossed, planned to be in person for our spring luncheon. Again, this year, mark your calendars. It's Thursday, April 28th. And it's our Spirit of New Canaan Luncheon, which means that we're honoring several great people in our community. Those are Barb Ackenbaum, Jim and Dee Dee Bartlett, and then the New Canaan Moms Community Collective. And each of these people have made tremendous impacts in New Canaan and far beyond. So we look forward to honoring them with you. And again, hopefully seeing you soon. So thank you all for being here tonight, and be well.